Today I'm going to discuss deposits in real estate. Stay tuned because at the end of the video, I'll share a list of tips and tricks when purchasing a home. So you won't want to miss it. Stay tuned. I'm Kristin Stampini, so let's get started. What's a deposit in real estate? A deposit is paid by the buyer on the successful agreement of the purchase sale of a home and forms a part of the final purchase price. In real estate, a deposit serves two purposes. It provides security to a seller, and a deposit ensures that the buyer has stake in the agreement and something to lose if they walk away and refuse to close if they're willing and able to do so. Pre-estimated damages in the event of the breach of the contract by the buyer. The deposit serves as a signal to the court of pre-estimated amount of damages. The higher the deposit, usually the offer looks better, okay, and is more attractive. In real estate, there is no fixed amount of deposit required by law. While deposits are technically negotiated between the buyer and the seller, local customs usually indicate what is acceptable. In Florida, it can be up to 10% of the purchase price, and that's usually seen as normal. When we bought our first house in Boca Raton here, we paid 10% down to purchase the home, and this was in a market that was this is back in 2005 when the market was on fire. If it is basically the seller has to agree upon the deposit can be at a financial risk, the buyer can be if they don't close on the home. If you're in a bidding war, the size of your deposit will most certainly be one of the factors taken into consideration, and I've seen sellers accept a lower price with a higher deposit when the deposit is due. So when is the deposit due? The standard wording, states usually the day the offer is accepted or maybe 3 days after, and then a second deposit usually after the inspection. That is usually typical here in Florida on how it works. You can do it however you want depending on the state, but just know that deposits are more attractive when they're higher to a seller. So you want to make sure that your deposit is high enough. Now, if you're doing a FHA and you only have 3.5% down for a deposit, then most of the time that's okay for sellers too. But people don't want remorse, the sellers, that they've taken it off the market and then the buyer just backs out. So pro tip, even if you've just started the house hunting process, make sure that your deposit, if you can, is around 5% minimum of the purchase price. You know, it is liquid and isn't locked away in a virtual bank or investment. Many buyers get a line of credit in advance or purchase or use that fund for the deposit. So make sure, even if you are a VA buyer, sellers do expect a deposit to pull their home off the market. So what happens if the deposit late? If your deposit doesn't arrive in time, you will be in breach of the agreement and the seller could potentially walk away from the deal. We see this happen all the time. So when another potential buyer has materialized and the seller sees the opportunity to sell the house for more money, so make sure you don't be late with your deposit. It's very important that you stay in contract. So where is the deposit held? The deposit held is normally held by a escrow company. It can be listing, buyer, trust account. So trust accounts are highly regulated and routinely audited. Deposit money held in a trust account cannot be used to pay the brokerage's expenses, salaries, rents, or anything. It has to be held in there for the escrow deposit. Your deposit's insured. There's an insurance policy that covers your deposit up to a maximum allot of $100,000 per claim. If your deposit exceeds $100,000, you may be asked to provide 2 deposits, one to the seller's brokerage and one to the buyer's brokerage. That could happen. Okay, so make sure you're talking to a lawyer to reduce your risk. If the brokerage holding your deposit goes bankrupt, which is extremely rare, all claims cannot exceed $3 million. So as a buyer, can I refuse to provide a deposit sometimes, but really rare, because it's not showing the seller that you're serious. And like I said, even if you're a VA buyer, the seller is expecting a deposit to take their home off the market. So if you don't have a deposit, then the seller is not going to want to take their home off the market. And then you might have to keep the home on the market or the seller will turn down your offer. So basically, make sure it's a binding agreement providing deposit. If you do get the loan, okay, and you are not denied on the loan, if you are denied on the loan, you should be able to get your deposit back. But of course, I'm not an attorney, so you would have to talk to an attorney. So if a buyer paid, let's say, $800,000 for a home and provided, let's say, $40,000 deposit, that amount plus any additional down payment plus the mortgage money from the lender will be provided to the seller, less the expenses and adjustments at closing. If I'm a buyer, what happens to the deposit if I don't get financing? Like I said, if your offer was contingent, so make sure it's contingent, obtaining financing, you aren't able to obtain the financing during the conditional period. So it has to be during that conditional period. You do not waive the condition. Your deposit will normally be returned to you in full without any deduction. Note that if your agreement of the purchase and sales states something different, whatever you agreed to in writing will be what applies to your situation. So make sure you read everything before signing a contract. It's important to note that a deposit is only returned with the agreement of both the buyer and the seller or by court order. So if a seller does not believe that a buyer acted in good faith in fulfilling a condition, they can refuse to release the deposit. If your purchase was not conditional on financing or you previously waived the condition and now you're unable to obtain financing, call your agent, call a lawyer, maybe lose that deposit if you're not able to provide the information needed. This is not a good situation, so make sure that you just follow what the contract says. What happens to my deposit if I don't waive the home inspection clause? So depending on the wording of the home inspection clause, you signed if you don't waive or fulfill the home inspection condition in the specified time, 5 days, 10 days, 7 days, 15 days, you will likely get your deposit back if anything can be wrong during the inspection. Remember, a seller doesn't have to fix deficiencies identified in the home inspection unless they agree to, which is incredibly rare sometimes depending on the situation. So make sure again that it depends on the contract. The seller is free to sell to someone else if all this happens. So also remember that there is an expectation of good faith, meaning a buyer can't just use the home inspection clause to get out of a purchase if they've changed their minds. Now, during the inspection period, it can. Okay, so remember, during the inspection period, they basically can get out of it for anything. So if I'm a seller, what happens to the deposit if the buyer doesn't close on the transaction? Well, in most cases, if a buyer does not close on a firm sale, in other words, all conditions have been met, the buyer forfeits the deposit and may be sued for additional damages. This is serious and messy, and your lawyer will guide you through the process. So make sure that doesn't happen. I hope you learned a couple things, and thanks again for tuning in my channel.